There's a certain kind of person who walks into a room and feels everything at once. The tension nobody named, the joy that's a little too loud, a single word in a text message that others would scroll right past, but that lands in their chest and stays there for hours. A sad scene in a movie that leaves them quiet for the rest of the night. A stranger's bad mood on the train that somehow becomes their own by the time they get home. To most people, an ordinary day is just an ordinary day. But for them, that same day arrives at full volume with no dial to turn it down. Every color a little brighter, every silence a little louder, every small moment carrying a weight nobody else seems to feel. Most people call this being too sensitive, being dramatic, being weak, and they hear it constantly. You're overreacting. Why do you take everything so personally? You just need thicker skin. After enough years of hearing it, they start to believe it. They start to think something inside them is fundamentally broken, some faulty wiring everyone else was lucky enough to be born without. But the truth is this: feeling too much is not a flaw, and it is not weakness. It's a nervous system that was built to receive the world at a higher resolution than most people will ever experience. It's a gift and a heavy burden fused into the very same skin. And here's the part almost no one tells them. If you don't understand how this system actually works, it will quietly drain you day after day until you have nothing left to give. Today, we're going to decode the psychology of people who feel too much and how they can finally stop drowning in their own emotions. I'm here with layered psychology. Let's peel this one back. First, we have to dig into where this intensity actually comes from. Why do some people feel everything so strongly, while others seem to let it all slide off? Experimental psychology tends to split this phenomenon into two main groups. For the first group, this depth is simply innate. Science calls them highly sensitive people, or HSPs, carrying a trait known as sensory processing sensitivity. From the moment they're born, their nervous system works like an extremely fine filter. It absorbs more, notices more, and feels more intensely than usual. Their brains show deeper activation in the regions tied to awareness, empathy, and emotional processing. They're not choosing to feel this much. Their hardware was simply built with the sensitivity turned all the way up. For them, the world is always displayed in ultra-high definition, whether they asked for it or not. For the second group, this intensity isn't something they were born with. It's something they learned. It grew out of an early environment where emotions were unpredictable or unsafe. Imagine a child growing up in a house where the mood of the adults could shift like the weather, warm one minute and cold the next. That child can't afford to be careless. They have to become an emotional radar station just to stay safe. They learn to read the smallest change in a parent's voice. They learn to feel the temperature of a room before a single word is spoken. Their amygdala, the brain's alarm system, stays switched on, constantly scanning for the next emotional storm. No one taught them this on purpose. Their nervous system simply built it to survive. And over time, that survival vigilance hardens into something deeper. It stops being a temporary shield and becomes the permanent way they feel everything, forever. So before we go any further, I want to ask you something, and I want you to think about it honestly. Do you think you were born feeling this deeply, or did you learn it from a childhood where you always had to read the emotions of the people around you? Drop a comment below and tell me which one feels closer to your story, because your answer says far more about you than you might expect, and I genuinely read every single one. Now, once that deep sensitivity settles into an adult life, how does it actually show up day to day? Let's move into the signs. Sign 1. Emotions arrive like a tidal wave, not a ripple. For most people, an emotion is a passing weather pattern, a little annoyance, a little sadness, and then it fades into the background. But for someone who feels too much, emotions don't gently arrive. They flood. A small disappointment doesn't feel small. It feels like the floor dropping out from under them. A moment of joy doesn't feel pleasant and manageable. It feels overwhelming, almost too big for the body to contain. This is partly because their emotional centers fire more strongly, and their nervous system takes longer to return to baseline calm. So while others shake off a bad moment in minutes, they can stay rattled for hours. It's not that they're choosing to be dramatic. It's that the wave is simply bigger, and it takes far longer to move all the way through them. Sign 2. They absorb the emotions of everyone around them. For them, empathy isn't a skill they switch on when a friend starts crying. It's a state that never fully turns off. They walk into a meeting where not a single word has been said, and they can already feel the irritation sitting in the air between two co-workers. Psychology calls the mild version of this cognitive empathy, simply understanding what someone else feels. But for people who feel too much, it crosses a line into emotional empathy, where they don't just understand the feeling, they physically catch it. This is closely tied to mirror neurons, the brain cells that fire both when we feel something ourselves and when we watch someone else feel it. A friend talks about their heartbreak over coffee, and 3 days later, that same heaviness is still sitting in their own chest, as if it had always belonged to them. They quietly become the emotional sponge for everyone they love. And almost no one notices that the sponge eventually gets too full to hold anything else. Sign 3. Stories, news, and art hit them physically. A documentary about a person they will never meet can wreck them for an entire day. A song can pull tears out of nowhere in the middle of a commute. A news headline about a tragedy on the other side of the world sits on them like a personal loss. Their brain doesn't file these things away as distant, abstract information. It processes them as if they were happening right there in the room. This is the double edge of a deeply wired imagination and empathy working together. It lets them feel connected to the entire sweep of human experience, but it also means they can be flooded by pain they have absolutely no power to fix. So they learn to look away from certain things, not because they don't care, but because they care so much that it physically hurts to keep looking. Sign 4. Their body keeps the score. Feeling too much doesn't politely stay up in the mind. It moves straight down into the body. Science calls this interoception, the ability to sense your own internal state, and it's largely processed by a brain region called the insula. People who feel deeply often have an extremely sensitive interoception system. A wave of anxiety isn't just a thought floating by. It's a tight chest, a racing heart, a knot pulling in the stomach. Their body becomes a loudspeaker for every single emotion, and sometimes it's shouting so loudly that they feel exhausted before the day has even truly begun. They carry emotion the way other people carry a heavy bag, physically in the shoulders, in the clenched jaw, in the gut that never quite settles. Sign 5. They crash hard after connection, and then they blame themselves for it. A long conversation, a party, even a genuinely good day out with people they love can leave them completely drained and hollow. While everyone else walks away feeling energized and light, they feel like they've secretly run a marathon nobody else could see. And here's the cruelest part of all. Instead of understanding why this happens, they turn on themselves. Why am I like this? Why can't I just be normal like everyone else? Why did that one small comment get to me so much? The exhaustion is real, and it's biological, but the self-blame stacked on top of it is the extra weight they never actually needed to carry. There's an old image that fits these people perfectly. A stringed instrument, tuned so tightly and so precisely that it can play notes no other instrument can reach. That same tension is exactly what lets it make music that moves people to tears. But strung too tight, with no one to loosen the strings, and it snaps. The sensitivity was never the flaw. The flaw was believing the strings had to stay at breaking tension every waking hour of every day. So what can people who feel too much actually do about all this? Because you can't simply reach up and turn the feeling off. Asking someone with deep sensitivity to feel less is like asking someone with perfect eyesight to see everything as a blur on purpose. It doesn't work, and it isn't the goal. The goal was never to feel less. The goal is to stop being swept away and pulled under by every single wave. People who manage to move beyond this burden usually anchor themselves in 3 quiet principles. Principle 1. Name it to tame it. There's a well-documented phenomenon in neuroscience called affect labeling, When you take a feeling and put it into precise words, saying this is grief, or this is envy, or this is fear, the simple act of naming it actually reduces the intensity of the emotional response inside the brain. It's like turning a nameless, roaring storm into something with edges you can finally see. So instead of drowning in a flood they can't identify, they learn to pause and ask, okay, what is this exactly? The wave doesn't vanish, but naming it gives them a handrail to hold on to while it passes through. Principle 2. Ask one honest question. Is this even mine? Because they absorb so much from the people around them, a huge portion of their overwhelm isn't actually their own to begin with. So they learn to pause and ask a single, surprisingly powerful question. Is this feeling mine, or did I quietly pick it up from someone else? Very often, the anxiety they've been carrying all afternoon belongs to a stressed coworker, a struggling partner, a tense stranger on the train. And the moment they truly recognize that, they can gently set it down. It was never theirs to hold in the first place. Principle 3. A feeling is data, not a command. This is the one that changes everything. When you feel emotions this strongly, it's easy to believe that every feeling demands an immediate action. That sadness must mean something is wrong. That anxiety must mean you have to fix something right now, this second. But a feeling is information, not an instruction shouted at you. They slowly learn to let an emotion appear, to observe it with curiosity instead of panic, and to say, I notice I feel overwhelmed right now. That's okay. I don't have to do anything about it in this exact moment. They let it move through them, and they let it pass. Like weather. When they practice this kind of letting go, something remarkable begins to happen. The sensitivity doesn't disappear. It matures. They still feel everything deeply, but they're no longer pulled under by every current that moves through them. That same nervous system that once overwhelmed them quietly becomes the source of their greatest strengths. The depth that used to drown them becomes the depth that lets them love fiercely, create beautifully, and understand other people in ways most will never manage. The friend who always seems to know exactly what you need before you say it. The one who notices the small shift in your voice and asks if you're really okay. The person whose art or words or simple presence makes others feel deeply seen. That is what feeling too much becomes. Once it stops being a wound and starts being a strength. Their intensity stops being a leak they're forever trying to plug and finally becomes a deep well they can drink from and offer to others. Feeling too much was never actually the problem. Carrying all of it, all the time, with no boundaries and no rest, was the problem. And that part, they can change. They can't dim the bright light burning inside them, but they can learn to hold it like a warm candle instead of a wildfire. Bright enough to understand the fragile, aching beauty of being human, but gentle enough to keep themselves warm, too. These are the deep feelers. The ones who love hard, notice everything, and quietly carry more than anyone around them will ever know. If you see yourself somewhere in this, understand clearly that your depth is not a defect. It is one of the rarest, most profoundly human gifts there is, sitting there waiting for you to finally stop fighting it. So let me ask you this. Out of everything we talked through today, which sign felt the most like you? Share it down in the comments because someone else reading them right now needs to know they're not alone in this. If this video gave you even a little bit of relief, hit that like button and share it with someone who also feels the world a little too deeply. Your understanding today might be the exact comfort they've been quietly searching for. And if you want to keep peeling back the hidden layers of the mind with me, subscribe to Layered Psychology. I'll see you in the next one.